Hello, strangers. But it's funny, because you look kind of familiar. Happy New Year, strangers. Should old acquaintance be forgot, maybe this story from the past will help us remember. This is story number 70. I grew up in the Midwest and stuck around when I got out of college and got my first real big boy job. But I still had a group of friends from both college and work that could be reliably rallied for a bar crawl. There were 6 of us out and weaving our way into the packed establishments. Me and my friends were out for a good time. First, we hit all of our usual favorites in the Village. That's what they call the area where they keep all the bars. But we were also feeling what I like to call golden retriever drunk, which is, well, picture a golden retriever. Happy, wholesome, excited, and down for anything, including new adventures. It was because of this that we decided to try a bar we'd never drank in before. It was crowded, summer, and the places were packed. Getting up to the bar to order our drinks took a bit of doing. It was what you'd expect for that time. A sea of popped collars, artfully tousled hair wilting in the heat, and a lot of overlapping, overdone body spray. After 20 minutes or so, we'd finally gotten a hold of an overpriced round of drinks. We forged our path to the back of the bar, where we assumed we'd find the darts, billiards, and bathrooms. And we did, mostly. The darts were in pretty bad shape, bent and chipped, but we made do. We played a couple of rounds as we sipped our drinks and generally snuck glances around. Ever get an odd vibe from a place? I mean, group of 30-year-olds in what was clearly a bar full of college kids with their Omega Kappa whatever emblems on full display. You'd think, sure, you feel out of place because you're an ancient geezer compared to these kids. But as we drained our drinks, I just had this gut feeling of tension in that bar, and frankly, it was killing my buzz. I kept glancing around, trying to locate something, anything I could link to that weird feeling, but I couldn't put my finger on anything. There was no creepy man in a trench coat staring daggers at us, no obviously too drunk girl in a bad situation. It was just a bad feeling in that one bar. A stifling, overwhelming weirdness. The best I can do to describe it to you is to ask if you've ever gone on those old house tours, like Hearst or Winchester. If you have, you might have noticed how the dimensions in those places are just kinda off. Like, okay, there's doorways leading into rooms and down narrow hallways, but they're eerily tall and slender. I seem to recall hearing or reading that people back in that past were smaller than their modern-day counterparts, due to having less refined medical care and poorer nutrition. Why would the doorways still be so tall as to accommodate for 7-foot people, though? Or how, in one room, you'd see a light on the wall, but it's too high and too far away from the door. When you enter a dark room, what's your first move? Turn on the light. But the placement of these lamps meant anyone who needed to use the light would have to navigate a completely dark room, stuffed full of delicate, rickety-looking antique furniture just to turn it on. And if you did manage and hit the light, you'd find that its light was jaundiced and weak. It wouldn't illuminate the room so much as simply show you dark shadows that its light wouldn't dare disturb. That's what I mean. The place looked normal on the surface, but as you looked around, it felt like how an alien would try to replicate human dwelling features with no understanding of how they're used. The right things were technically there, but their placement made no sense. Well, it could have just been me, but it turned out my bad feeling was shared. As my buddies emptied their glasses, no one made any move to go sort out the next round.
Finally, one of my friends, Scott, spoke, asking, "So on to the next place then?" It was almost funny how quickly everyone agreed to that. Just as we finished the dregs of our drinks, there was a break in the rattly bar music. The pause allowed a noise to be heard that previously had been covered by the din. It came from down the shadowy little hallways that probably led to the bathroom, a horror show I had spared myself so far. The bar was noisy, but the bang, like a door being slammed into a wall, followed by a yelp, was able to carry over the din of patrons chatting. We looked at one another, then to the crowd. We were fast enough to catch a few heads that had been turned in the direction of the noise snap away. The noise, the yelp, distress. It had been heard by more than us, but no one moved to do anything about it. The next song started, but now that we were tuned into the noises coming from the little hallway, I could hear what I thought might be cries for help. My friends all looked at each other, asking with our eyes, "Did you hear that? What's that?" But now we seemed to be the only ones taking notice. We might too have fallen prey to that bystander effect, but me and my friends were golden retriever level of drunk, and our curiosity won. I and two of the lads moved to the dim hallway and peered in just in time to see the door crash open. I caught sight of the arms of someone appearing to try and leave, only to be pulled back in by unseen hands. Another yell, a man's yell, and then the sound was muffled by the door swinging shut again. Not thinking, I moved further into the hallways and pushed the door open. I happened to swing it right into another guy and push him into the wall. He rebounded with a grunt, stumbling back into the rest of the people in the tiny bathroom. In the bathroom before us now clustered four guys. The one I'd knocked into a wall, a tall, gangly blonde kid, a thicker, meathead-looking guy with a shaved head, and between these last two, and clearly the owner of the arms we'd seen, a pale kid with closely cropped black hair. I recognized him from the black sweatband he'd had on his wrist, visible during what I assumed was his escape attempt. All three of the other guys looked at me blank-faced, but the fourth, what was becoming clear to be their victim, was anything but. His eyes were wet-looking, anxious, but his mouth was pinched shut, like a kid trying to keep quiet in church. Behind me, Scott pushed his way into the crowded room, saying something like, "Wait, what are you guys doing?" The taller of the guys holding the black-haired kid began to speak, painting on a smile that even in the murky light, you could see didn't fit on his face. He said something like nothing was going on, and they just needed to talk. The other two started to chime in, wide smiles undermined by their nervous eyes flicking around to each other. Scott started to argue, backed up, I realized, by the rest of my friends. They'd followed us down the hall, and were now clumped around the doorway. A clear message sent to the weird group in the bathroom, the desired privacy these guys had wanted so they could talk. Well, that wasn't going to happen. I finally spoke over the noise, asking, "Why don't you let the kid go?" calling out the elephant in the room. It was risky, but the 6-on-3 odds and liquid courage emboldened me. The murmuring from my friends blended into a Greek chorus behind me, asking, "Yeah, why are you holding him like that? Did you wash your hands before grabbing up on him like that?" And so on. More nervous flicking of their eyes around the room, but the other two guys were mostly looking to the bald meathead-looking guy, looked to be the leader of their little gang. He went from a feeling of coiled, ready to strike to sudden, oh so faux casual. The white-knuckled hand on the kid's shoulder releasing so suddenly that the kid, now let go, stumbled forward and into my chest. The guy said something like they were all done there anyway. His hand slapped a chummy palm into the kid's back. I felt him wince and start to stumble backwards. But as he did, the three guys were walking at me, looking to saunter out. Reflexively, I stepped aside, but brought the kid with me like a clumsy two-step. Bald Meathead strolled past first, playing it too cool, but his two cronies turned their wide, unblinking eyes on me, then Scott, as they shouldered past us and left the crowded bathroom. We watched them go. Then I repositioned the kid in front of me, giving him a bit of space. I tried to meet his eyes, but he kept staring at the floor. We all asked him if he was okay. What was that about? He just didn't respond. That is, not until Scott asked if we should call the cops. That snapped him out of it. He said no cops. It's fine now, they're gone. He darted, so quick it nearly tripped me as he sailed past. He paused, stutter-stepping only to shoot me a glance, to say thanks. And he was gone, leaving 6 confused guys staring at one another in a bar bathroom. What could we do? Nothing, really. We decided that this was as good a sign as any to make our own escape from that weird bar. Hey, at least it made for good conversation at the next bar. Maybe a story to trot out, once time sanded the weird feeling off of it anyway. We didn't stay out much longer that night. Over the next hour, the guys started to peel off to their respective girlfriends, spouses, and Ubers. Scotty and I decided to finish strong at the Irish pub, then share a ride as I only lived a couple of streets over from him. He made the call for a car, and we shuffled out into the air, feeling the summer humidity around us go from sweltering to cooling. We stood out on the sidewalk for a bit, the buzz replaying the night's events in my head. Right when I thought about the kid in the frat bar bathroom, Scott elbowed me from my reverie, saying, "Look who it is." I turned. Slumped up against the wall of the Irish pub, legs splayed out on the sidewalk, was the kid. We'd walked right by him, hadn't even noticed. I drunkenly cheered, "Hey, it's the guy," and we ambled over. But the kid didn't so much as jump at my shout. Hey man, you straight?" Scott's hand fell on his shoulder, hoping to see him respond. But he didn't. I knelt down, putting my hand under his chin to lift it. I figured he was just drunk, staring off into space or something. But his skin felt cold. Too cold. I jerked my hand away. Scotty jumped back as I recoiled. The kid slid down onto the sidewalk as Scott's hand no longer held him up. He fell like a stone. All I managed to say was cold. My brain was racing, but my tongue was thick and slow. Behind us, the rideshare guy had arrived. He rolled down his window, beginning to ask what was going on. Scott told him to call 911. My whole body just began to shake, so hard I nearly missed that I was nanoseconds away from vomiting. I managed to do a 180, scraped the crap out of my knees, and ejected all the alcohol I'd had in several wet barks into the gutter. I turned away from the steaming mess, and from the way he'd fallen, I could finally see the kid's face. His eyes were slightly open. The only way I can describe them is matte. There were no beads of light flickering, making them look real or alive. The cops came, followed by the ambulance. We were herded off to the side as the paramedics surrounded the kid, finally strapping him to a gurney and spiriting him away in the back of the van. I had turned away from his limp body, but from Scott's vantage point, he saw the gummy dark blood on the kid's head from where he'd been hit with something from behind. The cops kept asking us what the kid's name was, no matter how many times we told them we didn't know him. Scott had to tell them to write down the name of the strange bar to get camera footage, or see if he'd opened a tab with a credit card. It was clear they weren't really listening to us, but we tried to give as detailed a description as we could. The cops seemed bored. They only made a few notes no matter how much we spoke. We gave our names and numbers. We asked the cops to let us know what came of it, but of course, they never did. I'd been afraid he was dead. The cold skin, the parted eyes staring, dry from exposure to the air. The odds weren't good. But from the paramedics' actions, the way they urgently strapped him to that board and took off in the ambulance, full lights and sirens, Scotty and I guess he wasn't. Hoped he wasn't, anyway. We had no way of finding out. The kid was easily 10 years younger than us. We had no social overlap, knew no one to ask. The paper was worthless, and online news didn't mention any of it. Scott, irritated beyond belief, decided to go back to the bar a few weeks later and ask around to see if we could find anything out, get any closure on the night. He told me he didn't even get across the street before he saw, you guessed it, Mr. Meathead inside through the glass windows. Took one look and Scott got the hell out of there. I would have done the same. It still bugs me, not knowing what happened to the kid. How a living, warm human could go from up against me, heart beating like a hummingbird with how frantically alive he was, to a cold, clammy mannequin dumped on a sidewalk only an hour later. Why him? How was he picked for this violence? What had happened to him after he darted away? If we'd somehow caught him, convinced him to stay with us, we'll never know. What I do know is, it remains the scariest night of my life.
They say that everyone's born with certain ingrained fears. Two as a baby, loud noises and the sensation of falling. And then you sort of pick up your preferences or pet peeves, your particulars as you get older, and experience dictates, trains your survival instincts as to this is something to fear. It is a threat to us, and it's gonna make your palms run with sweat when you see it, when you sense it looming behind you. But how does one encapsulate the fear of something nobody saw coming? A random group of people in a random place doing something randomly vicious and violent. Keep your heads on a swivel out there, strangers, for as strange as we are, there's far stranger beyond us. If you'd like to get in touch or share a story from your past, email and socials are on the screen and in the description. Liking, commenting, and or sharing this video feeds some sort of algorithm monster that lives under YouTube's bed. So they say. And otherwise, I'll see you again soon. Stay strange, stay safe, and take care, strangers.